I have to warn you, this is the last video. After this, you're not going to have to come to class anymore or do any of the homework in this class. While you may think that's good as a student, people at a company receiving that warning, we'll talk about the word warn in a second, it might not be so happy. Hopefully all of you continue your education and take other classes and eventually graduate. Hopefully anyone laid off continues with their employment and can find work elsewhere and continue on living their life. That's why the WARN Act warns employees and the government about an impending layoff. Companies go out of business all the time. Companies, hopefully, a lot of them don't go out of business, but they can still do layoffs. They can still close a plant. They can still move employees around. They can still have a lot of other things that affect people's actual employment. So, with that being said, there are layoffs at companies, and there are warnings, acts that it has to be given. And a lot of the problems with layoffs are age-related and NLRA-related. A lot of the claims come up, for example, with the NLRA, if a company is trying to avoid unionization, they might close that location down and open it up somewhere else. You can't do that. Unionization is a protected class. Concerted activity is union activity is a protected class. And so if that happens, you can't discriminate against it, which means you can't move work elsewhere. An example, not in the reading, just real quick, Boeing tried doing that. Its big main plant for making airplanes is in Renton, Washington. It had a lot of trouble getting the Dreamliner off the ground, pun intended. But there were a lot of problems getting that airplane into service. And so the company kept blaming employees, saying, hey, like the plant workers, we're not making money on this, so you have to keep taking cuts. And they went on strike on 2 separate occasions, saying, we are doing our job. We are building these airplanes to specification as far as testing them out and that sort of stuff. The engineers and the design people, they are the ones that are messed up. We're not going to build a plane differently than what the engineers say. That's probably good. And so we're doing our part and we're doing it well. So don't make us take cuts while they still have their full pay and they aren't getting laid off and that sort of stuff. So they went on strike. Boeing said out loud as its reasoning, we're going to open a new plant in North Carolina. That's a right-to-work state, and so it'll be harder to unionize that plant, and then we won't have to deal with strikes. That was the official reason Boeing gave for moving the work to North Carolina. It spent a couple $2 billion building a new plant and tooling it up and all that other stuff. It took a couple years for this case to kind of go through the courts because Boeing fought it pretty hard the whole time. There were a lot of problems in the meantime with taking parts that were all made in Washington because all the suppliers were there, putting them on a train across the company, building fuselages, putting those back on trains across the country for final assembly. There was still some work to be done in Washington to do that in Washington. And there were a lot of other problems, but one of them was that the employees sued, saying, you discriminated against union activity. We have a right to go on strike. You can't move our work. And it went all the way through the courts, and the courts said, yeah, that's a protected class. You can't do that. If the company said it will be cheaper, if the company said we like the East Coast better than the West Coast, that's not an illegal reason to move operations. It's very expensive. And it might be, someone might sue for that anyway, but the official reason Boeing gave was to avoid strikes. Strikes are union activity that's protected. So the court ordered Boeing to move. It didn't have to move the work. If it wanted to, it could still build things in North Carolina, but to at least spend as much money in that plant on those employees as it had before to give them work, to give them a living, because it was, not right in its original move. So a lot of those sort of like plant closing, mass layoffs, or just any layoffs usually, fall under NLRA. by the way, you don't even have to be in a union to go on strike, and that strike is still protected because the activity itself is what's protected. So you can't move just because someone is doing something you don't like that might be considered union activity. So Boeing lost that case. It did eventually move the work back because there were so many problems getting the things back and forth across the country and a lot of extra costs. But you can do that, and a company can do that. A company can say, we're not going to make that brand anymore. We're not going to make that product anymore. We're not going to be in this business at all anymore, and that's okay. A company is allowed to do that. But when you go to lay people off, you have to warn them. WARN stands for the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. WARN, W-A-R-N. And what that company is doing is warning the employees and warning the government that it's going to lay people off. Companies subject to the WARN Act have to have, these layoffs have to be expected to be at least 60 days. If you lay someone off for a week, you don't have to do that. I worked somewhere one time where a train derailed in the plant. It wasn't a big disaster, but the train had just jumped the tracks, and it took 2 days to get everything back aligned again. It was an emergency. The employees were laid off for 2 days, so they did have to do that, but it was an emergency, an unforeseeable thing that happened that wasn't the company's fault, and so it didn't have to give the warning. But in general, if it's something the company is planning, I'm going to shut down a plant, I'm going to stop making that product, that decision isn't made just in one meeting. It's a long-term decision. And so the company is expected to give 60 days notice of that layoff to the employees and the government. Also, companies that are covered have to have 100 employees. And what they do is they look at the payroll. 100 employees full-time, full job is 40 hours a week. So they look if there's 4,000 hours, math, 100 times 40. If there's 4,000 hours accounted for in a week, then they look and say, yeah, that company is covered by having 100 employees. If it had 200 employees and they all worked part-time, okay, that's more than 100 employees, they're covered. If it had 50 employees who worked 80 hours a week and that company just paid a ton of overtime, they're still covered because all of those hours are being worked and they're just being done by fewer people. But they look at is 100 people. Private companies with 100 people or more have to give the 60-day notice before they do layoffs. The date of that layoff is the date where they count back from. So as far as what date you have to give to warn people, that 60 days goes back from the planned layoff date. If you don't give that date, if you don't give that warning, you still have to pay everyone anyway. So you might as well give the warning because if not, you're still paying out through your payroll their full, whatever they made for those full 60 days anyway. You might as well get work out of them. And if you're going to give layoffs in waves, not all at once, you might all have to give separate warnings. You can give one altogether. It's allowed to be more than 60 days, not unreasonable. But if in your warning you say over the next, few weeks, we're going to be getting rid of X amount of people per week, that's fine. But anyone within 90 days of each other, even if it's done in waves, is considered one layoff. Why are we worried about how many people are laid off? Well, because there's different levels of warnings that you have to give that are classified by the government. So a layoff is a layoff, and you're getting rid of some people, you don't have work for them, their position is being eliminated, whatever the economic situation it is, that's the reason you give, okay, and that's fine. There's also a plant closing where that affects the community differently. Where if a location is being closed for at least a month, that affects the community, especially since a lot of factories and things are in small-ish towns. But if you think of cities think of Midland, there's a lot of office workers for Dow there, but there's still a lot of manufacturing people. And if the plant goes down, that affects the area a lot. Think of places like Cadillac. Think of Lordstown, Ohio. that whole city depended on one plant. So the government needs a warning if the main source of income for that area is going to be shut down for at least a month. They need to get the warning. There's also a mass layoff where if you are laying off at least 500 or more people, that's a mass layoff because it affects the city more. They want more of a warning. The warning goes to the employees so they know, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't buy those jet skis right now because I might not have a job. Maybe. The warning is, a warning that you might get laid off. It's not that you will, but maybe they'll not buy big ticket items. It's also a warning for the city that, like, hey, a bunch of people are going to be laid off. A bunch of people are going to be applying for unemployment. A bunch of people might need retraining. That city or community might say, okay, the community college needs extra things, extra classes, extra professors, something to be able to train people in new things if they need a new skill or, see what happens. They have statistics about what happens in certain areas and they know how to prepare. So all of those warnings are important to the people because they should know if there's a layoff being considered that they might be affected to. And the government needs to know because the government has to make sure that those services are available to those people, and that way they're not caught flat-footed when all of these people are laid off. Also, before laying people off, the company should have a plan on how they're going to select the employees. That needs to be part of the warning to the government. It should be open to the employees. It doesn't have to be because, just for people to keep each other accountable. And, they want to make sure in advance that the way you select employees is appropriate and not going to be discriminatory based on age or anything like that. There are claims if the company doesn't have that, or if someone thinks that it is a discriminatory or targeted layoff toward a certain group of people, they can file a claim for discriminatory discharge and a RIF, a reduction in force. There are two ways an employee can establish a prima facie case of discriminatory discharge in a RIF. This is based on age. The first one is that the downsized employee, can one person file a claim, was over 40 years old. He was selected for termination from a larger group of candidates. He was performing at a level at least substantially equivalent to the lowest level among the group of employees retained, and the group of employees retained included one or more substantially younger employees who were not performing any better than the terminated employee. So what basically happens is that person is working and gets laid off and performed better than someone younger who was retained. That can be a claim for age discrimination during a RIF, during a layoff. The other way they can sue is the downsized employee is age 40 or over again. He was performing his job to his employer's reasonable expectations. He was terminated or suffered another adverse employment action. Other similarly situated employees were substantially younger than him, were treated more favorably, or there is additional direct circumstantial or statistical evidence indicating that the plaintiff would not have been discharged but for his age. For that, legitimate expectations is this person is good enough and they got rid of that person instead of someone else. But the age difference, usually this is if there's a larger age difference, but basically even if they are the same level of competency or their performance evaluations show that they were the same, if they both got similar marks, then the company should be keeping the older person. And they can say, no, because you preferred this younger person over me, there's no reason to get rid of me when this younger person who did the same job got to keep their job. If that employee proves their prima facie case, the employer can defend itself by showing the lawful reasons, just saying, this is how we chose people. And there are some young people, there are some old people, whatever it is, but hey, this is legal and this is why this person got chosen over the other person. And then if the company defends itself, of course, the person can rebut to, try to prove that the reasons are pretext and that it's more likely that the decision is based on age. We can look at an example of a Warren Act case in the Meeks-Walker versus Macon County Greyhound Park. That case is messy, and it was long, and so I'll make it real short here. There was a greyhound racing track in kind of the middle of nowhere, and that was a main source of income for the county. But states have certain licenses for gambling, and they only allow it in certain places. And this place had a gambling license for greyhound for dog racing, but that was it. People don't really go to the racetrack to see greyhounds racing as much as they used to, I guess. So this track kind of converted itself into like an actual casino with floor gambling, with machines on the floor, and eventually they had like blackjack and those sorts of things. They did not have a license for this. They were kind of doing it in secret. The county wasn't really enforcing it as much because that was the big source of income for the county. But the state eventually did shut it down for having an illegal gambling operation. In the meantime, there was a whole bunch of drama. They were just winging it the whole time. Everyone was just flying off by the seat of the pants because what they were doing was illegal. It wasn't that organized. It was like, oh yes, we started with a few slot machines, and they were successful, so then we added some more over here. And then they were just eventually decided, we're not even going to race dogs anymore. And so then they were going to shut down part of it and have the machine gambling, and then they were going to shut down the whole thing and lay off more people and make like a gambling floor and all this other stuff. And like the dates were really kind of lucid and close to each other, but not really. But then we finished this project early, so we're starting that other one early. It was messy, and they were just winging it. In the meantime, the state government found out that these people are operating a casino and that it's getting bigger and bigger. It's not like, oh, there's one person that had one slot machine, which would also be illegal, but that this thing was seriously going to be in violation of a lot of laws. So the state went in and shut it down. Everyone got laid off. Some people got warnings when they were talking about, we're going to shut this part down. Other people got warnings about that other thing, but then they ended up shutting it down earlier. Everyone was laid off when the state shut it down for being an illegal gambling operation. And so Meeks Walker sued. She was like, I'm an employee here, and now I'm missing out on all this money, and I depended on this because you were kind of in the middle of nowhere, so there wasn't really many other places to go work. The court gave her, she won the case. They gave her the case. She won. The company did not properly give a WARN notice. There was a bunch of stuff in there that I just explained about. Was this a mass layoff? Was this a plant closing? Were there waves? There's all this other stuff. But and if you want to go look at that, you can go read the case a little more in depth. But it's basically, like I said, just what I explained. The main point of the case is everyone's got to give the warning. Everyone. And this was not an emergency situation. A lot of, there is an emergency thing, like if a train derails in a plant and you literally can't make cars because a train is in the way and you can't load things to remove them from the plant once you're done making them, that's an emergency. And it's 2 days, and okay, we're gonna lay people off. The thing about an illegal gambling operation is they shouldn't have existed in the first place. And so since they were operating without a license, they should have known that they would have eventually be shut down. That was what the court said. Remember, the court is part of the government, and so they're going to be on the side of the government usually and say, hey, the government made these regulations for a reason. You knew they existed. You knew they were there. You were still operating it. This isn't an emergency. You brought this emergency on yourself. If these people were still racing greyhounds, it wouldn't be an emergency, or maybe it would have, I'm sorry. It would have been an emergency if the government came and shut them down for no reason, but you weren't doing that. You were operating an illegal operation, so you should have known you're going to be shut down at some point. So this is not an emergency. You should have given these people their warning. So Meeks Walker won on her case, saying, I didn't get the proper warning, and then, depending on how big and all that other stuff, gave other people their money and damages as well. But you got to give the warning, 60-day notice that you might be laid off. The warning, this wasn't as much in the case, has to go to the department that might be affected. So if you're working at a car company and the layoffs are going to come in engineering, you don't have to tell the marketing people. You can just warn the engineering people, or vice versa. If it's company-wide, then you got to tell the whole company this might be coming. But if it is, oh, this department, we're rearranging some money and this department isn't going to have the budget that it used to, you warn that department that there might be layoffs. You warn the whole department, not just the employees you think might get laid off. Just if I'm saying, oh, the marketing department has less money and so we're going to lay off some marketing people, you warn the marketing department. It kind of stinks for the people that, you don't, it's adds stress. You don't want to warn people if you know they're not going to get laid off, but there's a chance, right? Because who knows, because a lot of these decisions are kind of made last minute. The Greyhound Park, was just winging it the whole time, but a company will usually give the warning because they know something's going to happen in that department. And then that gives them 2 months to kind of figure out and get the last minute details. And that way it gives them kind of room to say, like, okay, we went with this decision instead of that decision. And that way they have a little bit more flexibility if you warn the department. But, you have to warn the employee that might be affected. So 60 days, and it doesn't matter if you're doing an illegal operation, if you're big, if you're small, as long as you have over 100 people working there, you got to give a 60-day notice to the area that might be affected. So age is a big factor when terminating employees, whether it's one by one like in the last video or in a reduction in force like we're talking about today. Reduction in force, by the way, is the official term for layoffs, whether you want to call it a layoff, a downsize, a right size, whatever it is. The legal term is reduction in force, and a big concern is, as usual, age. It's a lot harder. The older you are, the harder it is to get a job somewhere else, and so they need more protection than younger people. So there are some claims for discriminatory discharge in a RIF. If someone thinks that they are being discriminated against, they have to show that the downsized employee was age 40 or over. This is a federal law, so they have to be over 40 to be covered. He was selected from termination from a larger group of candidates. He was performing at least a level substantially equal to the lowest level among the group of the employees retained, and the group of employees retained included one or more substantially younger employees who are not performing any better than the terminated employee. So basically what this claim says is, I was laid off and I was performing better than someone who was younger than me that got to keep their job. Since I'm performing better than the younger person, but you got rid of me instead of them, this is age discrimination. So that's how that claim goes. Or the other way of doing it, still age, the downsized employee was age 40 or over. He was performing his job to his employer's reasonable expectations. He was terminated or suffered some other adverse employment action. And other similarly situated employees, similarly situated is, the position, skills, qualifications, that stuff. Other similarly situated employees were substantially younger and were treated more favorably, or there was additional direct circumstantial or statistical evidence, including that the plaintiff would not have been discharged but for his age. What that one basically is similar, just a different way of proving the first one, that the company laid someone off because they were older instead of them being younger, and favored younger people or gave better treatment to younger people than the older person. Both of those will prove a prima facie case of discriminatory discharge for age. Like the rest of the claims, if the plaintiff or person or ex-employee proves their case, the company can defend itself by showing the lawful action, the reason they chose that employee. Here was the reasons we gave, and we gave them in advance, and this employee just happened to be as part of these reasons. And if the company successfully defends itself, then that employee can come back and show that it's pretext, or it's just more likely that it's based on age. Some pitfalls of this is, usually when you're laying people off, It's an economic issue, and you need money, and so that's why you're doing it. Choosing based on the amount of money you make generally affects age. There's a lot of people that work a place and get just increases each year, merit increases, across the board increases, whatever it is. And so a lot of places still, the longer you work there, the more money you make. And so the longer you work there, the more likely you are to be older. If I worked at a company for 30 years, that means that I am at least 52, let's say, if I graduated college on time and got a job right out of college and stayed there. Now I'm 52 if I've been there 30 years. If I've been there 1 year, it is likely that I could be also 52 years old. It's probably more likely that I'm 24 and just got out of college and I'm taking that job, right? So when you base it on the amount their salary is, it's a lot more likely that the older people go. That's kind of a mix between discriminatory discharge and adverse employment action, or not using that adverse employment action to say there's an adverse impact on the employees, and they might sue for both, use both claims, because you can sue for as many things as you want. But that's, facially neutral. Oh, we're trying to save money. We need to just get rid of the people. And yes, since we're trying to save money, we're going to get rid of the people that cost the most. And it just disproportionately affects older people. And it's wide enough that it's not a coincidence. Remember the 4/5 rule, 80% was the difference in outcomes. Did the older people get laid off at an 80% or higher rate, compared to the younger people? Or, like I said, they can prove, this sort of case where, even if the company defends itself by saying, no, this was the way we were doing that, that defense can be used, but then that rebuttal can be that adverse impact claim to show, no, because it's all old people anyway that make the most money. So a lot of places will look to be not discriminatory, will look at a blank org chart and decide how many of each position needs to go, and then choose based on that, and not necessarily how much a person makes or what their position is worth. But those are the claims, and that how it can work for someone making a claim against age discrimination during a reduction in force during layoffs. Bringing together the Warning Act as well as the discriminatory discharge and RIF sort of claim that we just talked about is the ADEA, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. We talked about that in the last video about what you have to do to meet those standards. But just know that with the age thing, you pick an age. It doesn't have to be 40, but if you want to offer buyouts to people, you have to say a certain age and up. If you want to say 60, if you want to say 52, if you want to say 28, it doesn't matter. The fact is you have to go that age and up. If you give people money, that's seen as being favorable treatment. So if you give older workers money and more money than younger workers, that's not discriminatory. You can't discriminate against age if they're younger, legally. So you can't say, oh, anyone 52 and younger. No, that's discriminating against the old people. You can't say, oh, anyone between 40 and 50 gets it. No, because now you're still not treating people older than 40 as well as people younger than 40, even though it's okay to be not treating the people under 30 as well as them either. So if you pick an age, you can do it by age, but it has to be that age and up. Pick whatever age you want. You can say 52 years old or older, and there's no upper limit to that. So anyone over that age can choose to do it, and it's up to them whether or not to accept it. You just can't treat people more favorably if they're younger compared to their older counterparts. Companies also go bankrupt. Sometimes they're forced into it, or sometimes they just choose to do it. A lot of companies have gone bankrupt relatively recently as a matter of restructuring debt. Some have been bought by other companies, and some are completely gone. That kind of all depends on what kind of bankruptcy they file and who the judge is, what they're doing. But obviously, no matter what they choose, the employees are affected by that bankruptcy. So employees are not secured creditors. I'm not going to go through secured transactions. It's a whole course in law school. It was actually my best grade in law school, and a lot of people avoid that class because I guess it's a lot of math for a lot of people. They don't like that. But in order of who gets the money, I think is important when companies go bankrupt. It's important to the banks. It's really important to the creditors. Employees are not creditors, so they don't get any money. If the company is going to continue operating, they usually leave the employees the way they are. Sometimes leading up to bankruptcy, they might ask the employees to take a pay cut, and especially if that happens, the court generally leaves them where they are. And obviously, employees should not expect raises or bonuses or any sort of thing that year. Unionized employees are a little bit different. They're in a contract, and the contract can't be changed on a whim unless you're the bankruptcy judge. The bankruptcy judge can change the contract, but for the most part, almost all the time, the judge will leave it up to the company to renegotiate the contract. Usually the employees who are in the union are the production employees or the frontline employees, and that's how you make your money. So you want to keep those people happy and you want to keep those people productive, because without people there selling your product, making your product so that it can be sold, whatever it is, then the company is never going to continue to produce and therefore be profitable and therefore eventually get out of bankruptcy. So they'll often get some concessions out of a union, but it usually isn't going to be as big as the rest of the employees, because they have the other non-unionized employees usually don't have any rights. So they do try to keep people there just so that the company can continue to be profitable. But they shouldn't, if the company owes them money, if they were promised they were going to get a bonus, if they had something coming, they should not expect it, and the company can give it to them or not. It's up to all of it is up to the bankruptcy judge. So just know that the employee has no rights under bankruptcy. Employment at will, they don't have a whole lot of rights in the first place, but absolutely no rights under bankruptcy. The company can kind of do whatever it wants. After an employee is discharged, even one-on-one, or like we're talking about today, just a mass layoff or a layoff for many employees, they can file for unemployment. Unemployment is an insurance. It's insurance, for the employees so that they don't just immediately go into poverty. But it is literally an insurance for the company. The company buys unemployment insurance because unemployment is paid by the former employer. It's not paid by the government. It's not paid by taxes. Unemployment itself is paid by the former employer. Unemployment is for people who suffered involuntary unemployment. Remember, constructive discharge is still involuntary legally, but if people quit, they don't get unemployment. You quit and you knew what you were doing, and so you left your job so you don't get unemployment. But if someone was fired, if they were discharged, if separation, however your work words it, it's all the same. If they don't work there anymore and it wasn't that employee's choice, then they get unemployment. Unemployment, the employee still has to be able to work, available to work, looking for eligible work. There's a lot of requirements like that. When they say looking for eligible work, that means that, a like job, a similar job. If I'm an engineer at a, aerospace company, then I would be looking for jobs at another aerospace company. And if I denied that other job, then I'm not going to be eligible for unemployment anymore. If I'm an engineer in an aerospace company and the garbage collector needs people, I wouldn't be ineligible for unemployment denying that job. That's a separate job. It's in a separate industry. I don't know what kind of skills you need as a garbage collector, but at that point you are taking a different path in life, and it's very different than the one before. Depending on your circumstance, you might be willing to take any job, maybe not. That's a personal choice. But as far as someone denying a job as something completely different that's wouldn't be reasonable for an average American, then that wouldn't make you ineligible for unemployment. So those things need to be met, and then that person can get unemployment. States have different rules regarding unemployment. In Michigan, you get 20 weeks of unemployment. 10 years ago, you used to get 26 weeks. Under all the COVID stuff, you get 26 weeks as well, but that's going to expire. So that's, each state does its own unemployment differently. Generally, though, you get 26 weeks in most states. Employees who are not eligible for unemployment, once again, employees who quit or employees who were fired for misconduct or something like that. What is misconduct? If the person was violent at work, if the person came to work drunk, if the person stole from the employer, things like that, where it's like, if it would pass like the just cause test about like, look, we warned you about this and you did it anyway. Look, you were, stealing from the company. That's misconduct, and that person is not eligible for unemployment. If you fire someone for performance issues and they just weren't a good employee, they would still get unemployment. They weren't doing something on purpose to harm the employer, they just weren't very good, they still get unemployment. So the employment, you have to work there, the base period varies state by state. The employee who is involuntarily separated, someone who's fired, gets unemployment unless they were fired for misconduct. And then depending on where they are, they get some money for almost half a year, 5 months, 6 months. And, that's to help them get back on their feet. But remember, the company pays for it. And the company, the reason it's called insurance, literally subscribes to an insurance. There is insurance that a company can buy that will pay that unemployment for them. Like all other insurances, it's experience rating based, meaning the more you use it, the more expensive that insurance gets. A lot of big companies are self-insured. So for example, the automotive companies just pay it out of their pocket. They lay people off. They're so cyclical all the time, back and forth, that they just say, you know what, we're just going to pay for this because the insurance is going to be really expensive and we're going to be basically paying for it all the time anyway. So that's fine. You can be self-insured, but the point is you have to have it. Every state has unemployment laws. If you want to operate a business, you have to have unemployment insurance, or at least some sort of plan to give the employees that money in case they get laid off, like we're talking about in this chapter, or suffer involuntary termination. And finally, the last thing we're going to talk about are restrictive covenants. This is kind of the last thing. The person, we went through the whole thing. We're hiring them. We're making sure we're not discriminating. We're paying them the same, all this other stuff. And they were either fired or laid off in a group. Then they can file for unemployment. Hopefully soon for them, they get a new job somewhere else pretty quick. This is where the restrictive covenants come in. There are many different kinds of restrictive covenants. It's usually something that a lot of employers have people sign when they start working there. But it is something that happens probably last because now they've gotten a job somewhere else. Restrictive covenants does depend state by state. So for example, a non-competition agreement, they have to be reasonable. In Michigan, what is reasonable? Michigan courts say reasonable is 40 miles. If they're going more than 40 miles away, then they can work there and that's fine. If they are doing something in a different industry that's not in competition, then it's not in competition, so it doesn't violate a non-competition agreement. How long? Well, 2 years. 2 years hurts. If you want to not make money doing your thing for 2 years, you can do that, but that does restrict, where you want to work. So you have to be at least 40 miles away within 2 years time to be doing something with a competitor. That's what Michigan thinks is reasonable. Illinois, if you end up going to Chicago after school, nothing is reasonable. Nothing. It is a restraint on trade. It is a restraint on trade. As far as commerce, if you can't get a job, if you can't go make money, then that limits your ability to go and buy things and support the economy and that sort of stuff. So nothing is reasonable in Illinois. No non-competition agreement is enforceable in Illinois. You just can't have them. So it does vary significantly state by state as to what happens. But as far as restrictive covenants, there is non-competition agreements to make sure people don't go work for the competition. There's also trade secrets, which was in common law that if a company invented something or had a trade secret, it's automatically presumed that you're not allowed to tell other people because it is a trade secret. Some companies have people sign agreements just to kind of put them on alert, like, hey, if you disclose a trade secret, we're going to go after you. They could go after the person even if they don't sign a thing, anything, but as far as disclosing a trade secret, that extra signature and makes them think about it to be like, okay, I'm not going to disclose trade secrets. Non-solicitation agreements, that is used more in the services industry, but basically you're not going to hawk clients from your old employer. I, graduated and now I'm a dentist, and so I have to work, I don't have any clients of my own, and so I'm going to go work under this dentist for a while and work in the office, and it's going to be the 2 or 3 of us, let's say. Okay, now it's been 5 years and I'm going to go off on my own. I can't tell all of my old clients like, hey, I'm moving across the street, come work for me, or come get your teeth cleaned, sorry, because now you are working for the main dentist, let's say, and now you're taking the main dentist's clients. If a client comes in, they do it because that's the office that they like, and they can go to that dentist. If they notice you're working across the street and have a sign and we're like, well, that was the one that saw me before and I liked him, then you can do that. But you can't like write a letter to all your old clients and say, oh, I used to clean your teeth and I'm moving across the street, come see me. Now you're taking clients away from that other dentist and bringing them to yourself. That would be solicitation. So there are restrictive covenants for that as well. So you can't do that if you've signed those agreements. And like I said, usually it's a doctor, a dentist, a chiropractor, that sort of thing. A lot of salespeople might have those, that you can't take clients away from the old group or something like that. So all of those are available in Michigan as long as they are reasonable, and it would have to be a different, it's different in each state, so you're going to want to look at it if you go somewhere else. A good example is the Nanomec versus Shurish case to talk about the trade secrets and any agreement that you're not going to disclose them. Ms. Shurish worked at a company that made nano, semiconductors and microchips and that sort of stuff. She worked there for a few years, and she eventually left, and she told the employer that she's going to continue her education. She's going to go get her master's degree, is what she said. She did not go get her master's degree. She got a job with BASF, which is it's the world's largest chemical company, but also they make some stuff like that too. It was across town. I'm assuming they were paying her more, stuff like that. So she got a job there. Seeing that, her old boss, when she found out, said, hey, you left us. You're not going to get your education. You're going to work for BASF. How? That's fishy. That's what they said. So they looked into her activity, and they noticed that, through all the data, that she emailed herself to her personal account a lot of information that could contain company secrets, or maybe that did contain company secrets. So they sued her based on revealing trade secrets and leaving to give those trade secrets to BASF and to give BASF the advantage. She says she didn't do it. What happened is the company could not prove that she gave secrets to BASF. It can't make BASF give documents over. It can look through her personal email as a subpoena as part of the case, but it did not show, there was no evidence that she emailed anyone at BASF any information, that she basically did anything. All it showed is that she did it. She would look at her email at home. A lot of them she didn't even look at. And so she didn't give away any trade secrets, and that it probably was just a timing, or maybe she changed her mind that like, oh, I thought I was going to go get my master's, but BASF is a big company with a lot of high salaries and good perks, so maybe she took a job there. Who knows? And maybe after working there for 2 years, they would pay for her master's or something. We don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is the company couldn't prove that she gave a trade secret away, so they lost on that account. As part of this case, she countersued Nanomec, the company, because in the meantime, BASF fired her. BASF said, This is a lot of drama, and I don't want to be blamed. The company shouldn't be blamed for stolen information or any of this stuff. So that's it. We're getting rid of her. So she was fired by BASF. Now she doesn't have anything. This is also kind of in the middle of nowhere. So those were like the only two employers in town. So she, didn't have much hopes of getting a job somewhere else without moving. So she countersued Nanomech and said, you caused me to get fired from BASF. Just to drive home the point, it was at will employment. She can get fired for a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all, as long as it's not illegal. It's not illegal to fire someone for being sued, which is what they did. BASF didn't want to be in any sort of publication saying they were trading secrets or stealing secrets or, hawking employees to get secrets. They didn't want any part of it. And so they just didn't want to have anything to do with any of the drama. They fired her, and so she didn't have any job, mainly because her old employer sued her. She won against the trade secret, she lost in the countersuit. It's at will. BASF can fire you for whatever they want. It wasn't that company didn't give like a negligent referral, didn't do any of this other stuff. You can't sue them for anything. You left there voluntarily for a better job at BASF, and it just didn't work out at BASF for whatever the reason is, and BASF could fire that person. So that's how that ended up. She was just kind of out of luck with the job. She didn't do anything wrong, at least legally, but the Nanomech was still unsuccessful in firing her because it couldn't prove that she actually gave any secrets away. And that's it. Terminated employees will begin to search for new work, and their former employers might or might not fill their old positions. This discussion today brings us full circle into our full legal issues in employment, from hiring to firing to layoffs and even restrictive covenants afterwards. I hope you have a better idea of what to do at work to avoid all the problems we talked about in these last few videos, and to be able to meet the letter of the law as well as the spirit of it and just be a generally good employer in the first place. Hopefully, you're able to keep your company's name out of any future editions of any books regarding bad employment practices. So thank you for watching, and I hope you learned a lot about work. And depending on where you are, your entry-level job might not be as relevant regarding this sort of stuff because you're not going to be the one making decisions, but hopefully you carry this forward and kind of learn as you go through work about what to do and what not to do when you get into leadership positions.